Hello everyone and welcome to a very nice game that just ended from round 5 of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2022. It's Nils Grandelius with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. Carlsen has, he's having a fine tournament so far. It's not excellent and he's not pushing towards that 2900 goal, but it's still okay. He's still kind of tying for first, maybe getting in second, third, so he is somewhat in the lead, whereas Grandelius lost already 3 games and he drew 1. So it would be very nice to get anything but a loss here with the white pieces against Magnus. It's a really crazy game. Both players will have their chances, as you'll see. So let's check it out. So Grandelius with the white pieces opens with e4. We have c5. Magnus goes for the Sicilian defense. Knight to f3. We have knight to c6, and of course d4, opening up the Sicilian. We have captures, and now e6. That time mono variation of the Sicilian. We have knight to c3 and now queen to c7, the Bastrikov line. Grandelius already had this position in this exact same tournament against Richard Rapport, where he played g4 right away. It's a very sharp line, and Magnus, as he's playing this, of course, is very well prepared for this. So Grandelius throws in a nice bishop to e3, and only now after a6 he goes for this g4 move. Usually you play something like queen to d2 or bishop to d3, just continue development, but he really likes his g4 line against this setup. So here, Magnus plays knight captures on d4, and it's with the idea that, okay, you just played g4, you've opened up this diagonal, so we want to play b5 and put a bishop on b7. We're definitely doing this, and Magnus could do it the way he did it, for example, with knight captures on d4, or you could play b5 right away. But now, for example, knight captures, queen captures, and then we're gonna put a bishop on b7 at some point, but not right away. So it's a matter of preference, so to say. So here Magnus played knight captures on d4. We have queen captures. Now he develops Grandelius's queen without any effort from him, and only now b5. We have queenside castles and bishop to b7, now gaining control of this diagonal. And now the position has been reached before, and there are a couple of very nice games. For example, Anand beat Van Forest here with king to b1. Also Jan Nepomniachtchi drew against Caruana with king to b1. So king b1, a popular move here, but f3 is actually the engine's favorite move. So this is what Grandelius plays, saying that he knows his stuff very, very well. Magnus plays rook to c8. Now the knight cannot move. If the knight moves, we're going to play queen captures on c2 with checkmate. So queen back to d2. Now the knight can move, and the b4 is no longer a threat. Well, it's kind of is, but not a deadly one. So here we have bishop to b4. We have to continue development, and now comes bishop to d4, defending here and attacking on g7. And it seems like you could win the game on the spot with e5, because where is the bishop going? The problem is bishop can capture on e5, and after the queen captures, we can play queen captures on d7, king f8, and queen captures on b7. And white is just winning this. You don't even have something like rook captures on c3, maybe because rook to d8 with check. And after the queen goes back, we simply capture it. Captures, and now b captures on c3. Nils would be very much winning here. So Magnus, of course, prepares e5. He plays f6 first, and now we have g5 going after this f6 pawn. You really want to open up this diagonal, and the position is still not a new one. Tari versus Suvorov in 2021, bishop to d6 was played, and Tari won that game very nicely. But the bishop to d6 isn't optimal here. Magnus plays h6, and this is now also the strongest move recommended by the engine, and it is now, as of move 13, that we have a completely new game. So this is now unexplored territory. Let's see how Nils deals with this. He plays g captures on h6. And okay, black has to react to this. You still don't have time for e5. Magnus plays knight captures on h6, and now we have a3. And a3 is a move that says, well, a lot, but also asks a lot of questions. So here he's basically saying that you can capture on a3, remove the defender of the knight on c3, and that this is fine for white. So Magnus says, all right, let's see what you got. Bishop captures on a3, b captures on a3, and now e5, well, either trapping the bishop or the bishop moves, and then we win back our piece. But now Nils plays knight captures on b5. He attacks the queen here, so a captures on b5, and now he just moves the bishop back to b2. And now comes the really fun part. Here Magnus immediately strikes in the center with the d5, but before I show you what happened in the game, we have to discuss one line. Because here people were asking questions. They were asking whether Magnus is just playing very creative chess, whether he just sacrificed a pawn and now he's going to sacrifice another one or even more, or he just mixed up lines. So which is it? Now I'm going to show you one position that starts with knight to f7. It's similar to what happened in the game, but different for one very specific reason. And after white makes a move, for example h4, now we play d5. And now let's say, okay, bishop captures on b5. We offer this pawn with check even in the line that was actually played, king to f8, queen to b4 with check, king to g8, and now this queen to b3 move doesn't really do anything, but in the actual game it does a lot, because now the knight is on f7 and you are not pinned here. The pawn can move, you can play d4. This is perfectly fine for black, so white would have to look for something else. So instead of this knight back to f7, Magnus went for d5 right away, and this is a very, very bold move because it doesn't only give up the b pawn, it also gives up the d pawn if white is brave enough to capture it. So here we have bishop captures on b5 with check, king to f8, and now the line that we've discussed, Nils doesn't go for it. Nils played bishop to a4 here. He senses that there could be some trouble here on the c2 pawn, so bishop to a4 guarding this definitely makes sense. But we also have to show the forcing queen to b4 check. Look at this, bishop covers this diagonal, queen covers this diagonal, you're gonna play king to g8, and now we play queen b3. And now the pawn isn't going anywhere. There isn't this d4 move for black because the knight is not on f7. And after you make a move, let's say knight to f7, now we play e captures on d5. And now we've won not one but two pawns. And now, for example, after knight to d6, you get this position where, okay, black has a lot of counterplay for 2 pawns, but with even a decent play, white should not have any problem here. So it's really interesting what Magnus had in mind had Grandelius actually went for this, because you have immense pressure over the c-file. Okay, white has the bishop pair, but what is the bishop pair even doing? The dark square bishop doing nothing, light square bishop not doing all that much with the d5 pawn here blockaded by the knight. It would be very, very interesting to see what would happen here. The rook can easily join the game with rook to h4, then being shifted somewhere to the queen side. For the moment, there aren't that many squares, but obviously Magnus had something in mind for this. But okay, it did not happen. Bishop to a4 was played, and now Magnus very, very happily advances this pawn all the way to d4. We have bishop to b3, also very nice because it cuts the king off from escaping anywhere. Now even ideas like bishop to a4, this bishop coming to a3 could be possible, forcing the king back into the center of the board. So knight to f7, and now we have queen to b4 check. We have king to g8. Now, it looks like you don't have all that much to do here, but this is actually perfectly fine for black. We have rook to d2, not only defending the c2 pawn one more time, but also you can double up rooks on the g-file and put some pressure along the g-file. So bishop to a6, now again gaining more control over the d3 square, so at some point the d3 might also be a terrible threat, and now we have f4. Other than f4, you don't really have a good move here because the position is so fragile. We have rook to b8 attacking the queen here, queen to a4, and now bishop to b5 attacking the queen, queen to b4, now offering Magnus a lot of nasty discoveries, but for the moment there really isn't a good one. We have bishop to a6, again opening up an attack, queen a4, bishop b5, queen to b4. Grandelius says, I'm very, very happy with a draw here. Are you happy with a draw? And here Magnus played rook to h3. Rook to h3 can be played, but also bishop to e2 is very nice. The reason bishop to e2 is very nice is after queen to a4, now we play rook to h3, and now we have this, very cool position where you're threatening to capture the bishop here. The pawn is pinned, so you're not going to be able to capture back. So we'd see something like captures, king captures, rook captures on e2 is not a possibility. This bishop is just very well placed here, so you'd have to go for something like f captures on e5 first. Point being that if rook captures, rook h to b3, and again white will not be able to survive this. This is just an overwhelming attack. So very extremely complicated stuff. So okay, Magnus went for for rook to h3 right away. We have f captures on e5, f captures, and now rook to g1. Rook to f2, also a very nice idea, but in the game, rook to g1 was played, and now Magnus has to find a very, very nice move, but it's not easy to find it. It's a really tricky position, and it's hard to spot such a move if you're not sure exactly what you're looking for. But just for fun, feel free to pause the video here and try to find the absolute best move for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this incredible idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop to a6. I moved it really fast to, impress you, so I hope you guys were impressed, but it was not played in the game. So congratulations to everyone who found such a strong move, and I will show you why it's such a strong move. Well, point is, your queen is attacked. So what do? You can't really move the queen because then we capture the bishop. So we have to capture the knight on f7 with check first. Bishop captures on f7, and now what do you play here? Well, you play king to h8. You don't play king captures on f7. If you play king captures on f7, then there's this tricky rook d to g2, and then, well, you don't care about your queen being attacked because you're threatening this pawn. And after the king moves, you're going to pick up the queen on c7. So the point is, after bishop captures on f7, we ignore the bishop, we play king to h8, and this is the star move. That will not be possible in the actual game because now you don't really have all that much. For example, rook to g3. Attacking the rook, and now what can black play? Well, black actually has to go back with rook to h6. Point is that if you go for the queen here, rook captures on h3 is checkmate. Bishop covers g6 and g8, and it doesn't even matter if you capture on g3. We play h captures on g3, and Magnus would again be lost. Doesn't matter what you play, rook to h2 will be checkmate. Even if g5, and this is the craziest hypothetical line ever, if g5, then queen captures on d4. I mean, what brutality. Threatening queen captures on e5 along with rook to h2. And if, of course, the queen is captured, we just capture on d4, king h7, and now rook to h2 with checkmate. Incredible, incredible. Bishop slicing here, guarding this. Just insane. So that's what would happen here after rook to g3. So Magnus would have to go rook back to h6, and okay, this is playing the absolute best moves. Now we bring the bishop back, bishop to d5, and only now we have rook captures on b4, grabbing the queen, a captures on b4, and we would get this position where Magnus would have a bishop, queen, and the rook against two rooks and the bishop pair. So all in all, it should be winning for black. So that's what was in the position. But after rook to g1, Magnus doesn't play bishop to a6. Magnus plays bishop to e2, and it's almost identical, but not in the sense that the bishop on e2 is hanging. And Magnus knows that the bishop on e2 is hanging, and of course the bishop cannot be captured, except in the line that we've just shown. That's winning for black. That's the problem, because now, okay, bishop captures on f7 was played, but now Magnus doesn't have king to h8, which was winning in the other line, because after king to h8, now we just give up the queen for the rook, and after queen captures, we even pick up the bishop here, and now white has too much material for the queen, two rooks and the bishop pair against the rook and the queen. Of course, this would be completely winning. To give you an example, let's say rook f3, we go after the bishop, bishop just goes back to b3, and even if a move like d3 to try and weaken white's position here, we're just gonna play rook to g2, attack g7. We don't care about anything here. D captures on c2, bishop captures. It's all white from here. So incredible stuff. After bishop captures on f7, the king h8 that was working if the bishop was on a6 no longer works because the bishop is on pre here on e2. So king captures on f7 has to be played. Now comes queen to a4. Now Nils sidesteps the attack. We have queen to b7 attacking the bishop here. And now Nils just repeats queen to b4, queen to c7, queen to a4, and now, okay, the bishop has to move, the bishop is attacked, the bishop back to b5. Also, bishop to c4 is possible, but the position is too crazy to analyze every move in depth. We have queen back to b4, or rather, we don't have queen back to b4. Queen back to b4 would be excellent for Magnus, because then rook to f3. And now after rook d to g2, going after the pawn, here we can trade off a pair of rooks, captures, and now of course it's much better. If rook f2 check, king g8, what do you play here? If you play rook captures here, then we just play rook captures on b4, so you have to react to the queen being attacked, so queen to d2 something, and okay, we continue playing this, we move the bishop to h3, bishop can come to e6, and black will just be better here, his position is just better. So instead, after bishop to b5, rook d to g2 was played. This is the only move for Nils, and he spotted it. We're already at move 35, and both players are extremely low on the clock. They're like 5 minutes each. So this is the only move that continues the game for Nils, going after that g7 pawn. So Magnus goes back, rook to h7, defending this. Now it's 2 minutes for Nils, 1 minute for Magnus, and now comes queen to b3 with check. Bishop to c4 now, opening a discovery here. Queen to g3, very strong, going for queen to g6, and now queen to b6. Magnus now attacks b2, but also guards the g6 square, and Nils goes for the queen trade. So queen g6 check, queen captures, rook captures, and now rook to c8, threatening a very nasty move because they still need to make one more move to reach time control, and the problem for Nils is that he has to play king to b1, but he has only a few seconds on the clock, and he needs one more move to reach move 40 and reach time control. He plays rook 6 to g5, goes after the e5 pawn, and now, okay, he reached time control, but now he allowed Magnus bishop to d3, and now he puts pressure on the c2 pawn, and again, from a completely equal position, now you are again in trouble. And what do you play here? Rook to f5 check is what Nils played. A very interesting idea, but also hard for a human to spot, is c3. And after pawn captures, bishop back to a1, looks weird, but you know, it works. Bishop captures on e4, rook captures on e5. All in all, it's a dead draw. So after bishop d3, rook f5 check was played. We have king to g8, and now rook to f2. This is how he goes back to defend the c2 pawn, and now Magnus goes rook to h6. Rook to h6, preparing to shift the rook over to the attack, but also preventing this silly idea of c3. Okay, now c3 is no longer needed. Rook to d1, now attacking the bishop, and now Magnus plays bishop captures on e4. And although this seems like a move you really want to play, you actually don't. You actually want to just move the bishop to b5, bring the other rook into the attack, play bishop to a4, and try to force white to play c3 at some point, maybe keeping the tension. But after bishop captures on e4, it's it's much easier for Nils to play this. Rook to e1 was played, attacking the bishop, rook to h4 defending, and now we have a4. Advancing the passed pawn, rook to c5, now guarding the a5 square, but also this allows Nils to go for the, well, basically for the instant draw, and that is bishop to a3. Bishop to a3, this is beautifully spotted by Nils. Bishop to a3 attacks the rook, so the rook has to move. You're gonna go to e7, force this rook away from the defense of the bishop, or rather rook to g4 will be played, and then h3 will force the rook away from the defense of the bishop on e4. Very nicely done. So bishop to a3, and now, okay, you could go rook to c7 to keep an eye on d7 square, but then just bishop here goes after this pawn, so you have to give up something. So rook back to c8 was played. Now comes bishop to e7, attacking the rook here, rook to g4 and h3, and now all of the squares are covered, so Magnus has to trade rooks here. So here rook g2, saying that okay, if you capture the bishop, I capture your rook, so you have to trade rooks. So rook captures, bishop captures, and now finally rook captures on e5. We have d3 by Magnus, now threatening to win this pawn, but now bishop to c5, blocking the rook's attack towards the c2 pawn. So rook to a8, now Magnus shifts the attention over to the a4 pawn, and now c captures on d3. We have rook captures on a4, king to d2, and now bishop captures on a3. We have rook to e4, offering a trade of rooks, but also it was in this position on move 54 that Nils and Magnus agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. Completely equal material, bishops are of opposite colors, so you really don't have anything to look for here. So there are two big questions here. Would Magnus win if he found that bishop to a6 idea instead of going for bishop to e2? And what would happen if Nils actually accepted Carlsen's challenge and went for the for the idea that we've discussed after this was captured, not bishop to a4 here, but just going for it with queen to b4 check, king g8, and now queen to b3. Well, what would happen here? Knight f7, c captures on d5. It's an incredible position for white. Would he be able to get something here, or would or is this something that Magnus actually prepared and was ready to play this, even though the engine gives it like a -2 for white, or rather -2 in black's favor. So this is another question. And did Magnus just blunder his preparation? Also a fair question, because in that moment where d5 was played, is knight to f7 a move you play first, or did Magnus willingly play this and he knew this and he just wanted to create a completely crazy line, much like for example Tal would? It doesn't seem to be the case, and very unlikely, because that's not really how you well, go forward your goal of reaching 2900 in classical, but you know, anything is possible, I guess. If he mentioned this anywhere, or there was an interview or something, do share in the comments. I would be very interested in knowing this. So yeah, that's the first game of round 5 that were shown. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Francis Sayre, Leslie Nope, Matthew Waldes, Mohan Churalandi, and Malaki Hevehan for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Tata Steel until it finishes. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.